Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory and welcome to episode 288 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We're thrilled to have an exceptional guest joining us today, so let's extend a warm welcome to Lucy Mosha. Lucy is an accomplished HR and process manager. Even more, she is a valued team member here at Counselling Tutor. Her professional journey is impressive, a BA in anthropology and geography, before going on to serve as a programme coordinator for the Botswana Business Coalition on AIDS. And then she further established herself as an accomplished HR and process professional. But today's conversation takes a more personal turn. Lucy experienced the vulnerability and urgency of seeking help for a loved one. She's been in the shoes of many of your clients, navigating the complex emotions and decisions that come with finding the right help and support. Today she's here to share her journey, insights and lessons learned from being the person searching for assistance. So stay to the end to hear her fascinating insights.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Rory. Rory and I are absolutely delighted to be here with you, and make sure that you stay tuned to listen to Lucy and her journey of finding a therapist, what it's like on the other side of the website or the other side of the phone, as Rory kind of pointed out just before we began today. And in episode 288, we're going to start off with ethical sustainable practice, where we're delving into the world of supervision. Now, if you're not a supervisor, this is going to be super interesting for you. If you're thinking of becoming a supervisor, there's going to be some gold there for you. If you are already a supervisor, then there's going to be a lovely download that you're going to really value. We're going to be speaking about the 7 habits of an effective supervisor. Then into Practice Matters, where we're going to have that interview with Lucy Mosha. This really is an eye-opener. It really is, listening from a client's perspective what that journey looks like. And then we're ending episode 288 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with Student Services, where we're talking about renegotiating personal relationships while studying. If you're studying, you may already have felt that study can kind of impact personal relationships. If it haven't yet, it may well do so. So definitely worth listening to. But kicking us off, Rory, with those 7 habits of an effective supervisor. And I guess we say this at a time just before we start our next cohort of our supervision training. Counselling Tutor's aim this year is to train 500 clinical supervisors in face-to-face supervision and supervision in an online environment. And one of the resources for our supervisors is this handout, and we're going to share it with you today. Rory.
Yes, and it's an interesting thought about supervision, because I think there's a lot of aspects of supervision that are hidden if you're not a supervisor. Ken, you know, if you're going to see a supervisor, for you it may be 1.5 hours of, you know, bringing client work, working through the the challenges you have with client work, or even looking at your own emotional connection with the client work, or identifying CPD. And then you leave and you take what you've learned in supervision, or the reflections from supervision, and then apply it to your practice. But actually, there's the supervisor is. I always think the supervisor is a little bit like a duck or a swan. We'll call them a swan because they're elegantly floating across the water, but underneath they're paddling away. And there's lots of work that's done as a supervisor, which is unseen. So I produced a handout, which basically is 7 habits of an effective supervisor. And you may want to download this and, think about, is this what you're getting from your supervisor? Have a think about, it's always good, I think, to think about, is your supervision, the supervision you're getting, working for you and your clients? So the first habit, I think, is back to basics, really, Ken, active listening.
Yeah.
I think a supervisor should be more receive than transmit, to be honest.
Yeah, very, very much so. And it's interesting, if you're listening to this and maybe considering whether you are ready for supervision training yourself, then see if you can kind of tick any of these off as a skill that you really have. And, I don't think there should be a counsellor out there that doesn't have active listening as a skill. But when we take that into supervision, it applies in the same way. In the same way as kind of when we're working with a client, what we're not trying to do is create an expert in the room type of situation where the counsellor is the expert and the client comes in to get the wisdom dripping down from the expert. We try and balance that over, and we do that by actively really listening to where that person is at. And the same is true in supervision. Yes, we would expect that a supervisor is further down the road, would have more knowledge and understanding of the modality that we're working in, but at the same time, they are actively and fully engaging with what we are bringing into supervision. And why is that? Well, it's because within a supervision relationship, it requires the same vital ingredients as a counseling relationship. And one of those is trust. And active listening, we know this from our first basics in learning counseling. We know that active listening builds a trusting relationship. It encourages that openness, and it helps in accurately identifying what is going on for a person, because the person is listening. They might use some of the active listening skills to kind of clarify and understand where you are at and what you are bringing in regards to your clients. And then I think, Rory, something that we maybe wouldn't have in counseling. So this would, and maybe depending on your modality, there are certain modalities where you might pop this in, but I'm going on to number 2 on the 7 habits of effective supervisors, and that is constructive feedback. Now, certainly in a person-centered setting, we wouldn't necessarily give constructive feedback unless it was appropriate. We were there more listening and helping the client to find their way. And of course, we're going to be feeding back. But that feedback looks a little bit different when we are in supervision. It needs to be a little bit more directive, but it also needs to be constructive and actionable so that you're not just getting feedback, you're getting feedback that informs your practice and how you go forward, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And, what we're talking about here in constructive feedback feeds into what I call, professional development or developing your practice on. The reason you go to a supervisor, one of the reasons, is your supervisor is further on down the road than you are, maybe a bit more experienced, maybe you've done a lot more CPD. Maybe that you're working in an area that's a specialism, and they've been in that specialism for a long time. And I think that, constructive feedback is a really important part of supervision, where you're acknowledging, as a supervisor, I acknowledge, my supervisee's strengths and, the things that they're doing in a really positive way. And also, I try to be as specific and objective as I can if there's any action to be taken. So I can think of one area recently where one of my supervisees had to had their notes sequestered by the police, and I had to give objective and actionable feedback to make sure the therapist stayed on the right side of ethics.
Yeah.
And that was really important. So one of the things was, we deeply respect our colleagues in the police service. We don't automatically give our notes up to them. The correct way of doing that would be to say, if notes were asked for, say, well, look, if a client wishes to have their notes, then what we would do is the client would ask me, I would supply the notes and they'd supply them to you. And, that's making sure things are in the right order. And I think the benefit of constructive feedback is it really does encourage professional growth. It encourages therapists to be able to say, in that particular case, well, thank you for getting in contact. I'm not going to do that. However, this is what I can do. And move their practice on. And I think it's a motivational issue as well. It motivates supervisees to develop the next level of practice. I'm always saying to my supervisees, so what's next?
Yes.
What's next? What do you think you'd like to do? To try to get them, not to keep them from being stale and static, to be honest, to try and help them move along and build their practice professional formulation. That's the words I was struggling with. Professional formulation to develop their practice as they go forward, Ken.
I like it, Rory. And you touched on something which is actually point number 3 in the 7 habits of effective clinical supervision for counsellors, and that's modelling professionalism and ethics. Now, you spoke about ethics in constructive feedback, the time where you have to speak about ethics, but we need to, as a supervisor, if you're a supervisor, you want the supervisor to be an example of ethical example, of professionalism. Something to aspire to. So what you would not value in a supervisor is them forgetting your appointment or turning up late or not being there on time for you. In the same way as we kind of service our clients in that way, we would look for that in a supervisor. And of course, as a supervisor, we would model that for our supervisees. And I think what's really important when we're speaking about professionalism and ethics, I want to add into this within the modality in which the person is working. So here is an example. If I am a counsellor and I've gone and I've done a certificate in online counselling, working online, maybe via video or something like that, and I go to my supervisor and I start speaking about my clients that I'm seeing online, if my supervisor doesn't understand the ethical principles that apply to online working, in such as how data is collected, stored, used, then they're not able to model the professionalism of those ethics for me as a supervisee. And I think that's one of the reasons when we look to our ethical bodies, our professional bodies as counsellors and psychotherapists, we're encouraged to engage in supervision with a supervisor who has an understanding of the modality or in the way that we are working. So if I'm working via telephone, then I would expect that my supervisor would have at least had training in telephone working to understand the ethical side of that, to understand what is required there to be able to guide. So what is the benefit? Well, when the supervisor is showing that professionalism in the ethics, then it sets a positive example and it instills confidence in the supervisee. And that confidence goes with that supervisee into the therapy room, and it is there and present with the client. And this is the thing. This is the thing. When we're speaking about supervisors or we're speaking about supervising, it's all in service of the client. You might think that, oh, well, my supervisor looks after me. No, they don't. They look after your clients. They look after you as well. Of course they do. That's part of it, but it is in service of the client. So kind of when you sign up to become a counselor or a psychotherapist, usually it's because there is a want to serve at a client level. Well, becoming a supervisor enables you to do that in a wholesale capacity where you can one supervisee might see 6 different clients, so you kind of have that touch point. So I think it's really important, that modeling of professionalism and ethics. And Rory, I want to go into number 4 and then ask you to kind of pick up on this. And this is this fostering of a reflective practice, and dare I say that we might even put in repraxive as well in there.
Yes, I think reflexive practice
reflexive,
is...
sorry, thanks
yeah,
for
reflexive
that.
is true. And, there's been a lot of talk over the years about reflective practice, and reflective practice is taking the time to critically think about your work, to think about what went right, what you might have done differently. It's not about being too hard on yourself. It's about saying, if I'd have gone down this route, that might have been different. Or if I'd have just used a bit more silence and allowed the client to speak a little more, that might have been different. And that's being reflective. But being reflexive is something really different. And reflexive is what you're going to do. It's all well and good thinking about, it would be nice if that, or I could have done that. But actually, you need to put that into practice. If you think that's going to be of a benefit to your client, then the reflexive part is saying, right, well, the next time the client's speaking, I will give them longer before I interject, or I may reflect in a different way. Or if I'm a trauma-informed practitioner, I may offer some psychological education at certain points if the client's really, really struggling. So I think the benefits of fostering reflective and reflexive practice is it really does promote self-awareness. There's even the most self-aware person, there is still things that you're blind to, sometimes other people see and you don't, which is why a supervisor's so handy, because they can hold that mirror up. And I think it develops professional growth, but more to the point, in everything we do, supervisors, therapists, we're all in service of the client. It's the client that's the focus of all our work. And I think it just develops a deeper understanding of client care and, meeting the client with perhaps more humanity, I think sometimes, Ken.
Oh, yes. I love that. I love that. Meeting the client with more humanity. I'm going to have that carved on a plaque, Rory. I like
Get
it.
a tattoo,
really.
Ken.
That word.
Get a tattoo.
Get a tattoo. So that's that, fostering that reflective practice. And I guess there's an element of challenge that is involved in that, but it's really kind challenge. It's non-judgmental. And that's why we start with the active listening and having the conditions within the relationship that make it a safe place, to be able to reflect and not feel judged, but be able to look back and go, you know what, Rory, I think I could have done better there. I wish I hadn't said that. And that is now reflecting on my practice in a kind way with my supervisor. If Rory, you were my supervisor in this hypothetical case that I'm making up as I'm going along. But what Rory might say to me is, and this is now going into the other side of that, is what might you do differently next time? And that is now challenging me to think deeper, to take that next level down. So that fostering reflective practice. And, if you're thinking of training to become a supervisor, how are you with that gentle challenge? Are you okay with it? Is there still some work to do on that? And I think that's why when when somebody is going in to train as a clinical supervisor, you want an element of maturity within that person's practice already. You don't want to be discovering that you struggle a little bit with challenge on a supervision training course, because there's going to be challenge within that relationship. And I think that brings us on to number 5 now, which is adaptability and flexibility. And we need to realize that everybody is different. Every practitioner is different. It was a quote of Carl Rogers, and I'm going to completely murder this quote. It's not going to be word for word, I can promise you that. But the idea of it was at a conference, and Carl Rogers was sharing a room with 2 other practitioners at the time, and they were speaking about the future of person-centered therapy. Carl Rogers, I have to say, was just listening at the time. He was a bystander getting ready for bed, and he was not engaging in what the future of person-centered therapy would look like. And when he was challenged on this by the other 2 roommates, he said, person-centered therapy will be as individual as the individuals who practice it. And that is really, really powerful. And I think it's a great example that there needs to be adaptability and flexibility, specifically from our supervisor. So what would you say about adaptability and flexibility, Rory?
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to acknowledge that, I think that it's not just person-centered therapists that are unique. I think, if you're listening, it may have come from the TA community. I think I met many TA, transactional analysis therapists or CBT therapists. And I think each person brings a unique perspective of their theory to practice. But when it comes to working with supervisees, I think it did help for me to be a teacher. I have a teaching qualification, as does Ken. And one of the things is that when you meet a supervisee, part of me sees them as a student to some extent. In other words, making sure that I'm differentiating, that's a teaching term, making sure that I'm matching their learning style, trying to find out how they learn, which is the best way they learn, which is the best way of communication. That I can communicate something so they understand it. And I think this is particularly important if you're supervising students, because students will come to you and they may have the real raw theory that they're learning, and they may have practiced that theory in their skills triads and sessions. But I think a good supervisor will say, oh, okay, well, we've got the theory and you've done some practice, but let's just see how that works in practice with clients, and helping a supervisee understand how to apply the theory so they understand what they're applying. And I think that I think that's really important. So I can remember having a lovely supervisee many years ago, and she said, I think my client's working on stage 7 of the 7 stages of the process. So I said, oh, okay. I said, and tell me why that is. And she'd tell me. I said, okay. I said, let's have a look at the literature together. And we got some literature out. And she said, well, I don't think it is now. She said, that's so helpful that you've explained the theory to me, because I wasn't really getting it at college. And it probably wasn't because the teacher wasn't doing a good job. It was because I just explained it in a different way. Yeah. And I think supporting diverse learning needs and trying to understand how your supervisee learns really does make it a really personal experience. Yeah. And again, benefiting the client.
Yeah, I love that.
Down to that.
Yeah, I like how you've said it. It's understanding how the supervisee might learn. So from the supervisor's perspective, knowing what the different learning styles are and adapting to be able to meet the learning, the way that the supervisee learns. For example, you go into your supervisor and you have a presentation from a client who's just come. Maybe you've seen a presentation within them that you need to do some CPD on. Well, if a supervisor was to just lift this massive, big, thick book off the bookshelf and say, well, what you want to do is you want to read chapters 17 to 21 of this massive, thick academic book. Well, that's all good and well if the person can learn and take information in through reading. But if they're dyslexic like I am, I would prefer a different way. I'd prefer a podcast episode or a video lecture on it with a PowerPoint that I can look at and refresh. So understanding how the supervisee learns and being adaptive to their needs and their ways of working, so important. And I guess everything we've talked about so far falls into point 6 of the 7 effective habits of being a clinical supervisor in counselling, and that's cultivating a supportive environment. So we're talking here about that safe place where a supervisee can share their thoughts, their feelings, and their experiences without the fear of judgment, and it encourages the risk-taking within the supervisee. So what you're not looking for, and I think one of the saddest things that can happen in supervision is when the supervisee goes, oh, I'm not going to tell my supervisor about that. That's the thing I'm going to keep hidden. I made a mistake, or I said something wrong, or the client got angry and left, so I can't tell them about that. As soon as stuff is hidden within the supervisee relationship, it's a pointer to maybe the environment is not supportive. Maybe it's not a threat-free or a judgment-free environment. So such an important point. We're always cultivating that supportive environment, Rory.
Absolutely. We're always making mistakes as well.
Yes.
I mean, that's the thing. The idea that, your supervisor's never made a mistake ever is, you need to put that right out of your head. And creating that safe space. It's amazing over the years how many therapists I've met who are kind of frightened of the supervisor. Yeah. And I always thought that was a bit sad, really. Because you shouldn't be, the supervisor is a critical friend with the emphasis on professional, friendship, if you like. And, they should create this kind of safe learning space. And, through the years, I've had supervisors who said to me, I've got something to tell you, I'm very scared. I said, well, what do you think is going to happen? I said, I've not shot any supervisees this week. And they go, oh, right, okay. And, it's really, I can't emphasize enough how important it is that you feel safe enough to talk about the things that maybe didn't go well. And, there will be things in your practices that have not gone well. You will make mistakes. We all do. That's part of being a human being. Your supervisor certainly has. And I think if you're going into supervision and you're frightened, like you're going into the headmaster's office at school, I think you either need to think about your own process, or maybe if you've thought of that, it could be that you perhaps need a different form of supervisor. But honest communication is the key phrase here. Yep. I think that with honest communication, you get emotional support, because this is a very emotional, profession we're in. And, we hear client stories, and we have a window into clients' lives. And to be able to go to your supervisor and say, look, I think I've done this, and I'm not sure if it's the right thing. And for your supervisor to say, okay, let's look at this together. Yeah. Let's look at this together. Let's explore this together. And I use a bit of a legal phrase nowadays, where if somebody's done something which is clearly going to get themselves into a bit of trouble further on down the road, I might say, I think you might be in difficulty with this. I think there could be difficulties ahead. I never say you've got it wrong. I just say, I think you could be in difficulty. Yep. And this is the difficulties I see. And I think by using thoughtful language, you encourage collaboration, and you encourage someone to, sometimes take the hard decisions and say, I think I need to either own up to this, or I think I need to just do something different. Or sometimes it's just a case of, actually, I think what I brought isn't as bad as I thought.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10 isn't as bad as I thought.
Yeah. Well, within that supportive environment, they're at least able to bring that. It's threat-free, and there is growth within that. It fosters positive, open learning environment, honest communication, supports emotional and professional well-being within the supervisee. And again, the supervisee takes that confidence into the client. So it's again in service of the client. I'm going to just recap. We've done 6 of the 7 habits of effective supervisor. Number 1, active listening. 2, constructive feedback. 3, modeling professionalism and ethics. 4 is fostering a reflective and reflexive practice. Adaptability and flexibility comes in at number 5. Not that they're in any order of importance. Number 6 is cultivating a supportive environment. And number 7 is really important. It is a commitment to ongoing learning. Now, here's the truth. A supervisor does not know everything. I supervised for many years, and often a supervisee might come in with a topic or presentation that I had not done CPD on. We can't be expected to know everything. You go and you train to become a clinical supervisor, and you're given a model to work with your supervisees, but you cannot know everything. So a commitment to ongoing learning is important. Now, I know that we all sign up to that as counselors and psychotherapists. It's not exclusively to supervisors. And if you look to your ethical or professional body, you will have a recommendation of a minimum amount of continuing professional development that you would have to do. So it might be 35 hours of CPD each year. That is not a box to tick. And specifically when you are a clinical supervisor, we're talking 35 hours at a minimum. A supervisor a good supervisor following the effective habits would certainly be delving deeper on a regular basis into their CPD, and it demonstrates a dedication to that continuous professional development. It keeps the supervisor themselves informed. And where would they look to be informed? Would they look at what the latest research might be saying? What are there any techniques that might be applicable to a certain presentation? And very important, what do the ethical guidelines says? Have there been any updates? So a supervisor, part of their ongoing learning would be to regularly do CPD check. And I guess, Rory, we run the Counselling Tutor CPD library. It's called Counsellor CPD Library. It's for qualified practitioners only. It's used by practitioners all over the world. And it's packed, absolutely packed with literally thousands of lectures and resources all about the practice of being a counsellor. Everything from taking notes and contracting to GDPR and that kind of stuff, to presentations as well. And we get experts in that come in and deliver this information in academic lectures that can be referenced. And it's a great source of CPD. And I know many supervisors will use that to kind of inform themselves and just brush up on the topics that may come up within a session with their supervisees. And of course, the benefits that flow down from that is it ensures that that supervision is informed and that it is current. If there's been any changes, the supervisor's informing the supervisee. It encourages that culture of learning, not just for the supervisor, but for the supervisee themselves. A supervisor may say, last time when you presented, you spoke about X client, you said such and such a thing. I've gone away and I've done a bit of CPD on that, and I've recognized A, B, and C, and I wonder if we might look at that today. So it shows the supervisee the importance of that ongoing learning, and basically it reflects the importance of that lifelong professional development, Rory.
Absolutely. Professional formation never stops. You're never the completed article in our profession, because there's so much to learn. And I think a really great question to ask a prospective supervisor is, what areas of research or what areas of CPD have you been involved in the last month?
Yes.
And sit and wait for the answer. And if you get a blank face, then you may want to kind of consider how far you want to pursue working with that particular person. I have to say, as a supervisor, I was just smiling wryly when you said 30 hours or 35 hours
yeah.
CPD. I wish, Ken. I mean, I'm in a fortunate position because obviously I've got huge amounts of resources and contacts. But even before I was in that position, I would spend hours reading, researching, and my touchstone for this, like as a therapist, is I always try to learn what the clients are bringing. So if the clients are bringing issues around trauma, I would go off and get some CPD around trauma.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens with supervisees. If I'm picking up a supervisee, one of the questions at intake I might say is, so what's your client group? What presentations do you work with? What age groups do you work with? And with that, I can get a good sense of, first of all, am I a good match for the supervisee? Because does my level of knowledge allow at least the beginnings of a relationship and a productive working alliance? And if there's anything specific, I might go and brush up on that. I might go and brush up on, certainly attachment has been something that's been attachment to neurodiversity. And I've spent not an inconsiderable amount of time studying trauma and neurodiversity and developmental trauma. And also, I don't think it's acceptable. So I'm a little bit on my soapbox now. For a supervisee to go to a supervisor, ask a question, and a supervisor say, I don't know. It's not acceptable. The acceptable response is, I don't know, but I'll find out.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'll drop you an email, or I'll drop you some resources, and let's put it on the agenda for the next time. I think that if you're being a really ethical and dedicated to this work, then you really need to be dedicated to the people who you're serving. And part of that is to meet their expectations. We're all colleagues. I mean, as we come to the seventh, the end of the 7 habits, one of the reflections I'd leave is that we're all in this profession together. They're all our colleagues. A supervisor is my colleague, be they a student who's just coming into practice or someone who's been in practice for a long time. They're my colleagues, and together we are in service of their clients.
Yeah.
That's it. End of story. And whatever it takes to be in service of their clients, we must, in the best possible way, accomplish and do.
Yeah, agreed. I'm going to go over the 7 habits: active listening, constructive feedback, modeling professionalism and ethics, fostering reflective practice, adaptability and flexibility, cultivating supportive environment, commitment to ongoing learning. If you want to get that handout, counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab, go to episode 288, and you can download the 7 habits of an effective supervisor. It will be right there on the page. Rory, as we kind of go out of this topic, if you've listened to this and you've gone, I can do that, I can become a supervisor, you feel that you kind of mature enough within your practice. We at Counselling Tutor, we train over 500 clinical supervisors every single year. Our training, I'll read it for you. The training course details: Counselling Tutor Certificate in Clinical Supervision includes online and telephone working, and it leads to a professional qualification in clinical counselling supervision. This training gives you the tools, the knowledge to be able to work professionally and safely with supervisees in both a face-to-face setting and using online digital technology and telephone. So that is our training offer. And if you're interested in getting more information on that, our next intake, if you're listening in real time, we've just taken an intake now, which is now full, but we'll be doing another training intake, which will start in April 2024. If you want to get information on that and maybe join that waiting list, you can go to counsellingtutor.com. Right there on the front page, you'll see the certificate in clinical supervision include online and telephone working, and you can click on that and you can put in your email, and we'll email you the details, the course handbook, and all of the information regarding the qualification mapping and the training aims and what the training covers. It takes about a year of your life. It's quite a commitment to become a supervisor. You need to be ready for it. You need to recognize within yourself that you're ready for it. And of course, there are criteria to be able to join the course as well. It's just not open to everyone. You can't graduate as a counsellor and go, right now I'm going to become a supervisor. You would not be able to get on a supervision course with that. But there you go, counsellingtutor.com if you're interested. So there it is. That is ethical, sustainable practice for today. We back out of that into practice matters. Really interesting interview today, because I know the backstory that Lucy is going to speak about. It's Lucy Mosha. She is part of the Counselling Tutor team. And I'm going to give a little bit of the background. Recently, we had our yearly in-person vision meeting where our leadership team in Counselling Tutor all came together from all over the world. They came together because we're a remote team mostly, and we got together in North Wales in the middle of a field with surrounded by mountains to take some time, almost retreat-like, to look at the vision. And our vision included what struggles maybe clients would have engaging and finding a supervisor that fitted them. And Lucy spoke about a little bit of her own personal experience. It was so powerful. I had tears in my eyes during that with what she was sharing. And Rory, you spoke to her and dug a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. So if you ever wanted to know what it's like to be on the other end of the phone, perhaps you have been as a client before you trained to be a counsellor, but just as an observation about the journey of a client trying to get the right therapist for a loved one, Lucy Mosha's story, I think, is really, really good. And I think it's also very thought-provoking. And this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
In this section of the podcast, we usually bring a fellow professional, someone who has an interesting aspect of their practice that I think the listener, may be interested in hearing about. Today we're taking a little break from that, doing something slightly different. We're looking from the other side of the telephone. And when I say that, we're looking from the client's perspective. So it's my great pleasure to introduce my colleague, who is our People and Processes Manager here at Counselling Tutor, Lucy Mosha, who is going to talk to us about her experience of finding a therapist for a loved one. And you really need to hear this, because I think you'll find it makes interesting, if slightly disturbing, listening. So, Lucy, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. As you know, I'm always up for having a chat. So happy to talk about it.
Well, thank you very much. And we really do thank you, because it's something that's probably unheard. You know, clients' voices, or those who are connected with clients, is sometimes something that's not heard. We usually hear our own voices, and sometimes we can become a bit of an echo chamber for our own ideas. So, Lucy, you started the process of finding a therapist for a loved one. Can you tell me, first of all, how you started off that quest? Where did you go and what did you look for?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's actually been, funnily enough, a few different people that I've assisted, or it's just come about that we've been looking for therapy, and in a nutshell, it was actually incredibly overwhelming to know where to start. It was interesting that I had obviously new counselling tutor, and it was, I came to you guys and said, where would you start? I'm not sure what I would have done if I hadn't been able to ask somebody in the know. I guess I would have Googled it to see what came up. And interestingly enough, I was chatting to someone else that I know who works for a charity, and they were saying, that anyone could go and ask for help, or get assistance or get therapy through that charity. And it's interesting that that didn't actually cross my mind. And I was asking myself why. And I think it's because we have, I can only talk about my own perspective, obviously. I don't know if I represent the average member of the public, but, I in my head, it was some subconscious thought that a lot of the help that exists through charities is for very extreme cases. And I don't know why I think that, but it was that fear that maybe I'd be told that the case wasn't, of a nature that they would be willing to take on. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but it was a very overwhelming experience.
Yes, I think that's really interesting, and I think what's really interesting is that you work with those guys. You work in the area of counselling and psychotherapy as a big part of your day job. And when you came to look for help for a loved one, you felt overwhelmed. And I guess the question could be asked, a general sort of rhetorical question, if this is the struggle you had, what would it be like for people who aren't connected to anyone in the therapy world? And also I hear that there's that, I don't know if it's a fear, but that consideration, shall we say, that maybe charities who offer therapy may have rejected your application because perhaps it wasn't severe enough, the presenting issue wasn't severe enough. That sounds quite interesting, because I work for charities and they're very open to taking people in. There's different degrees of emotional and mental distress. But I wonder what gave you that idea. Was it just the fact that there were charities, or the names of the charities? What was it that gave you that thinking process?
Yeah, I think I think that the perception that the general public has, or that, a lay person has who may be looking for therapy that's not been assigned through a doctor, because, we also have this theory, I think, that, counselling or therapy gets assigned to you. So when you haven't been assigned it and you just think, it'd be something that would be really useful for a loved one or for yourself, I think it's not that anything a charity has done or said. So I think the perception that I have is very different from the actual reality. It's that if someone is giving something for free, and I know that it's not always for free, people pay what they can sometimes, it's that would be reserved for people who need it most, and you think that there are other people who need things more than you. That's just a natural feeling, isn't it? That there must be other people who are more deserving or need it more than you do. So I think it's, again, a lot of these things are at a subconscious level. I mean, I do think that it is a very difficult thing, isn't it? I mean, it's difficult enough choosing anything in life. But as things go online, if you are to choose a therapist from scratch, not knowing anything about how, different types of therapy or anything like that, and you go online, which I did, and I used the online directory, even if you filter or you narrow the search because you know what you're looking for, you're still going to get about 100, at least 100 people, therapists come up in your feed. How do you go from there? And it's that feeling that someone is going to share some intimate things with that person. So you don't want to dive into the wrong, to choose the wrong one. And I understand that, I understand now, having spoken to you guys, that, you can get maybe a chat, an initial chat. But, if one of the therapist's profiles I'd found had acknowledged that, just that, I know how hard this might be trying to find the right person for you. I'm more than happy to have a quick chat about how to help you find that person. And if I'm not the right person, I'll help you make a referral. I would have instantly chosen that therapist.
Well, I mean, I think that's the first takeaway. I hope people are taking notes at home. If you're driving, just replay it when you get home. Don't take notes while you're driving, but don't do that. But I think there's a couple of things. The first is the idea that people aren't deserving of therapy. This idea that there's people a lot worse, and if you go to a charity, you're taking someone's place, and so turning up to therapy with that thought of that you're kind of disempowering someone else who maybe have a lot more issues than you do. And I say you, but I know you were getting the therapy for someone, a loved one. And I would say, as a therapist, that is something that I've come across a lot, where people have said, I don't want to waste your time. And I'm sure there's lots of other people. And, I think part of a therapist's work, certainly my experience, has been to say, no, you're important here. You're here because you've got a difficulty you want to look at and try and work with, and you're just as important as the person behind you. That's how it should be. But the very idea that the initial contact on a therapist page is acknowledges that struggle, acknowledges how difficult it may be to reach out, would be appealing. And also, calm the soul, I guess. Yes, that person gets me just from what's being written. That's just from that messaging. So did you find anybody like that, or what happened? You got this list of therapists. What happened?
I did, obviously in collaboration with my loved one, we identified someone who we thought would be the right person, or a person to start with, and had the first session, which went not well. It just, unfortunately, the conversation had between the therapist and the patient, in a nutshell, put the patient off. She just said, that's just not going to work for me. That's not right. And then the thought of going to try someone else was just too painful.
Yes.
It was just too painful to go and try again. I know I've heard this, maybe book an appointment with 3 different people, have 15 minutes, but you're talking about things that are triggering for people. Yes. I know you don't get into that straight away, maybe. I don't, I'm talking from a very uninformed position, but that was the experience that this person had.
Yes, and I think that's really interesting. Just to clarify, was this in the room therapy, face to face, or was this online?
Online.
Online. Okay. So I think that's the really interesting thing. If you're making first contact with a client, it might be this is the only one opportunity that a client may take. Bearing in mind what's already been said, very hard to reach out. Very, very, very tough to kind of take that step. This might be the one opportunity that a professional gets to speak to someone who's struggling, and to find that that first initial meeting didn't go down well. I mean, that does sometimes happen. I mean, people, it's a very personal relationship, a therapeutic relationship. But I guess for a therapist to be really mindful of that this might be just the one opportunity. Can I ask, and please, you don't have to say, what was it that your loved one kind of didn't feel was a values match for them?
I think that one of the things that this person was struggling with was around sort of self-image, and that had been shared with the therapist prior to the initial meeting. And the therapist made a comment on this person's appearance and whether they looked younger than they were in age.
Wow. Yes. So, I mean, I think that would come under the general heading, when we're talking of professional standards and ethical standards of care. I think there are a lot of complaints raised for issues like that, Lucy, because knowing the background, a good therapist should get the background, understand a little bit about the client, what might be triggering before that that's called the intake assessment, and then proceed very, very gently. The first meeting, it should be a very, very gentle exploration for what's going on, and very thoughtful of how that might impact on the presenting issue. So what happened was that therapist didn't work out. Your loved one disengaged. What happened next?
Well, they didn't pursue getting therapy, and that's okay. I think another thing that I'd like to just say is that I think there is the whole thing that, if this was something that I had suggested, they were very open to it, but it was still a suggestion from myself. So maybe, in time, there'll be a point in their lives when they wish to re-engage that search.
Yes.
But I think as far as I'm, know that they've taken other sort of self-development, personal development, and tried to find alternative ways to deal with some of the things they're struggling with.
Yeah. So in terms of therapy, a lost opportunity, although that your loved one went on to find other ways of helping themselves, because this is what it is. It is a form of self-help with another.
Yeah.
The therapy route didn't work. So I guess, go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, I would just like to say that, again, I'm a strong believer that I think that there needs to be more messaging out there, and I don't know where this responsibility lies or where it could come from, but that therapy is not for people who are unwell or ill. And again, I think that's a sort of just a thing that we think, because I mean, people go to a doctor for a checkup, don't they? A physical checkup when they're not unwell, or they go to a doctor when they're not, they're not dying. They just, are experiencing something doesn't feel right. And I would love to see it that people did that around their emotional and mental health as well. You don't have to be unwell. You just have to be going through something really difficult, or I think that needs to be more. There needs to be more of that thought and messaging.
Yes, the therapy may be just a checkup, that you go to a therapist just to say, I'm feeling like this, and I just wanted to kind of get a sense of what was going on. Of course, therapists don't diagnose, but I think what I'm getting is the idea that you have to be quite unwell to go to a charity, and also I think it's about how therapy is messaged generally. That it's not like you've got to be very unwell to go. If you are unwell, it's good to go, obviously. But, arresting that before it becomes so big a problem that someone becomes unwell.
I have my own personal theory that one of the reasons why coaching has become so popular and prolific is because, although I understand totally coaching is not therapy, I do understand that. It is still a way that people are getting help to self-reflect or to help to look at themselves. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's something that's needed in people's lives. I do.
Yes, and I think that's an interesting idea that, what we offer as mental health professionals, is it therapy? Or is it coaching? I've had both. The therapy was useful and helpful. The coaching was more motivational and put me onto a different track. They were both useful in their own ways, but I'm not sure that if I'd have wanted coaching that I would have gone to a therapist, because I don't think I would have got them at the direction that I needed.
No, but I meant vice versa. I think there may be people who want therapy, but it's easy. It's less labeling to go to a coach than it is to go to a therapist.
Yeah, yes. Well, that's really interesting. I suppose if there's any coaches listening, that's where the referral opportunity is. Now, you're in the ears of our listener in this interview, Lucy, and our listener tends to be a professional therapist or a student who's a therapist. If you could give one idea or one theme that might have made your journey better on finding a help for your loved one, what would it be?
It would be the messaging, the initial messaging that someone first comes into contact about you on your website or your profile, and it being about acknowledging, as we said earlier, how difficult this journey is, and that's okay. And it doesn't have to be, it's okay for it not to be right straight away. I think, if I was to take anything away, it would be that. It's that fear of making the wrong choice.
Yeah.
And not knowing what choice to make.
I think that's a very powerful message, and it reminds me that we talk about empathy a lot in counselling. It's one of the cornerstones of therapeutic practice. But empathy on your messaging, empathy on your initial contact, acknowledgement of how difficult this might be to reach out and get help, because we even in these enlightened times, people still struggle with the idea of mental health. It's one of the last taboos, I think, and people struggle with it. So I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of therapists out there now going to the websites and rewording them, and that will be down to the fact of you, Lucy. So Lucy Mosha, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to Lucy Mosha. I think there's an element of courage delving into a personal story and bringing that, and I'm really, really grateful for that. And of course, I'm always grateful for you, Rory. You saw the power of the story, you reached out and brought us all the information, because you believe that the rising tide raises all the boats. So by sharing it, hopefully, it gives you, as our listener, an understanding. So we move away from practice matters now. We go into our student services. We've always valued our students. As students, we started only serving students, and we recognize that the journey to becoming a counsellor has ebbs, flows, ups, downs. It's very windy for some. It's different for everybody. But one of the things that comes up as a evergreen topic along this is how training, when we train to become a counsellor, we start experiencing personal development. We start seeing the theories and applying them within our own lives. And it can shake our relationships, our personal relationships, our working and professional relationships. It can sometimes be difficult to navigate the changes that are happening within with those around us, Rory. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Have you ever wondered if you're using counselling skills effectively. Confidentiality means we rarely see skills used by others, so it's no wonder that so many students say they lack confidence in their counselling skills. That's why I built Counselling Skills Academy. Counselling Skills Academy is an online course that you can do at your own pace. It will give you the skills competence and confidence to know that you're using your skills most effectively. You will see real counselling skills used by a counsellor in real life sessions, covering everything from how risk is assessed right through to working towards an appropriate ending. Visit counsellingskillsacademy.com to learn more and to claim your counselling tutor discount. That's counsellingskillsacademy.com.
When I trained, I think I want to say 25 to 30% of the people in relationships in my group, their relationships ended.
Yeah.
And it was because they'd gained value to themselves. And, I'm going to be really honest here. Training to be a counsellor made me a better person. I don't often look back to my old self because I don't live there anymore. I'm not that person. It's like looking back to your old house. I don't live there anymore. And I sometimes think, thank goodness that I trained to be a therapist, because it gave me a perspective to the world that I'd not had. I'd not got it from my parents. I'd not got it from my friends. It was a completely different perspective on the world. And as that perspective started to change and I decided who I wanted to be, unfortunately, some of the relationships, some very good friendships just didn't fit anymore. I just couldn't carry on in the way that I was going on. And I lost friendships. I lost some lifelong friendships because my value system had changed and my view of the world had changed. And it was a values match, and my values didn't match. And I wish those people well, and still do, if any of them should be listening, and moved on. But it wasn't easy, and it just wasn't with friends. It was with relationships that I had with family members. I had to make some pretty tough decisions, but underpinning those decisions was what I'd learned in my studies. And what I've become to understand about myself and relationships through the learning of becoming a counsellor. Now, it's different for everybody. Some people started with the counselling course I didn't really change very much and, came out the other end, and that's fine. But I think you have to factor in, if you're training to be a therapist, that you might find that some relationships change, and you may find that even the very closest relationships come to an end.
Very much so. So we're recognizing that personal development brings about change in how we see ourselves and how we might see others, how we interact with ourselves, kindness to self, and how we might interact with others. So it can have an impact. And, what we want to speak about here is renegotiation, because this is the tool. The tool is renegotiation. It's going, perhaps, if those relationships are worth having, but you can't be the person they want you to be anymore. You now need to be who you truly are. It's about renegotiation, and that takes immense courage, so many times, even with renegotiation and going in and saying, no, I don't find those sexist jokes funny anymore. In fact, I never have. I've laughed because, I've been a sheep and I've been following and I want to impress you. And, having that courage to say, I don't find that funny. I don't want to hear about those kind of things. I don't want to hear those kind of jokes and remarks and how pointing at other people and speaking about their misfortunes and chattering about others behind their back. I'm not that person anymore. I can't do this anymore. This is how I can go forward with you in this relationship. And sometimes that renegotiation is within a marriage or a really close relationship. Renegotiation can work. It means setting boundaries. It means almost contracting. I mean, we learn those skills in counselling training about our boundaries. And we learn maybe what our own boundaries are, our own personal boundaries. And for myself, you've shared yours. Thank you, Rory, because sharing part of your journey, I think, puts colour to this. With myself, I was in a job, and it wasn't a job I particularly loved, but it paid the bills, and I needed my job. But it got to a point where I didn't feel that I was being congruent within my job. I was in sales, I was in marketing, and it almost felt like I had to tell some untruths to be able to win some of the deals, and I couldn't do that anymore. And I needed to leave that job because it wasn't a fit for me and it wasn't something that I could renegotiate. So I had to walk away from that. That was very painful, but I had to be true to myself. So recognition that yes, we can be shaken, but there can be a renegotiation. Think of it as the counselling process where we might outline what boundaries look like and almost recontract within our relationship to see if that is savable via renegotiation. Can we still interact with these people that we've maybe been with for decades? It might even be family members. Some, sadly, I guess, are not always savable.
Yeah, and I think renegotiation, perhaps I was coming from my avoidant, dismissive attachment style. Talking about getting rid of people. But renegotiation. And, I speak for myself. I think that, I had to do a lot of soul searching and thinking about my relationship with my wife. And there hadn't got to be a lot of renegotiating from her perspective, but certainly from my perspective, I had to think, about just about how I was in the relationship and how I turned up in the relationship, and renegotiation, and I think it's probably one of the hidden things in counselling training. Everybody knows they're going to learn some theories, and everybody knows they're going to do some skills practice, and everybody knows they're going to do some, personal development, but they're not quite sure what that is until you engage with it. But I don't think the aspects of personal change and relational change is something that is often considered when people take up therapy. And it's striking to note that this is something that comes up quite often in our Facebook feed, Ken. Yep. The times that people post in our Facebook saying, is it just me, or has anybody else had to do some renegotiation / discontinuation / cutting off at the limb / with their relatives, friends, etc. And I think it's a hidden part of counselling training, and an unexpected one. And if you want to join our Facebook group, as we often say every week, just go to Facebook, pop in Counselling Tutor, and there we all are, and joining the conversation. There's loads of people having chats about different aspects of counselling. But to get back to this, renegotiating personal relationships, I think it's for a lot of people, I think it's quite a big aspect of becoming a counsellor, Ken.
It is, and I'm going to share an interesting story. Well, it was interesting for me. Hopefully there's some something usable in this for you. I lived for many decades in South Africa. My parents immigrated when I was 7, so I lived most of my life there, and I've now been in the UK for about 17 years. And it was in the UK that I trained to become a counsellor. What was really interesting, well, I had a current to go back to South Africa and resubmerge myself in my old friend group. And I went from the old me, really chatty and involved and gregarious and being part of the crowd and laughing too loud with the rest of the crowd kind of vibe, to finding that I couldn't integrate in the same way. I found myself almost deadpan, emotionless, being silent a lot, because I recognize that who I was then and the crowd that I interacted with, I left them. I went away. I trained and I developed. And when I went back, it just didn't fit anymore. It was like a really It was like an old coat that just doesn't fit anymore. I know that I used to get into it. It was a coat that I enjoyed and liked, but it just was not me anymore. And I kind of walked away from that interaction of that old group saying, there's nothing there for me anymore. I've grown past that. And I think that that's the thing, if you are experiencing during your training these pains, they are growing pains. They really are. It means that you are growing. You're growing, and maybe those around you are not. And those that are worth keeping around you, take some time to think about how it might be for them in a non-judgmental way. Maybe put your boundaries in place of who you are right now, and explain that and be yourself. But those pains do come from growth. I guess that's maybe a positive. It doesn't feel like it at the time, though.
It doesn't, and also, as we always used to say at the end of residentials, and I nicked this off my tutors who said it at the end of our residentials, just remember, your partner hasn't gone through the process you've gone through.
Yeah.
They're not doing the training you're doing. And, it was effectively just be thoughtful, really, that, although you change, you can't expect someone else to change because you have. And sometimes you have to renegotiate things. And in our house, my wife's little put down, if we're having a debate about something, she'll say to me, "You're so philosophical, Rory. You're so bloody philosophical." And I go, "Well, I'm just philosophical." And then she goes off, and then the world's good again. But things aren't as I hate to say the phrase nowadays, black and white, as they are. You realize that you can see past people's motivations. I meet many people on a day-to-day basis, and I guess my first thought is, I wonder what their story is. I wonder where they came from, and when they say things, I wonder where that's generated from. So I'm a bit more accepting in general, in my general communication with people I meet on a day-to-day basis, but I'm very discerning now with who I class as friends, I guess.
Yeah. There's a saying that you are you are the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you look at the 5 people you spend the most time with, you probably act and interact very similarly to how they do. And that was certainly the case of that. I realized I can't interact that way anymore with my old group. So that kind of takes us to the end of student services today. Share your experience as a student, and if you're past student, you're in practice, come and share it anyway, like Rory said, in the Counselling Tutor Facebook group. This has been episode 288 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yeah, so we started off with ethical, sustainable practice, the 7 habits of an effective supervisor. A challenge to ask you if you're happy with your supervisor, and maybe it's the time for you to train as a supervisor and become supervisor yourself. And we gave you details of the courses that we run. Then we moved to Practice Matters, where we spoke with Lucy Mosha. Choosing a therapist, something we spoke to someone on the other end of the telephone, the people you would speak to, potential clients, and got a unique perspective of the journey of finding the right therapist for a loved one. And then finally, student services, renegotiating personal relationships while studying. I guess the hidden, or now not so hidden, aspects of training as a counsellor, the fact that relationships may need renegotiating or even moving on from, which is not uncommon for those who train as counsellors. So as we come to the end of this session, if you've liked what you've heard, if you like the session, let me ask you a favour. Pop a 5-star review. Let's have a 5-star review on whatever platform you're tuning in from. It really helps us reach more ears and grow our community and get our message out there. And if someone someone in your circle, maybe a colleague, would benefit from our discussions, pop it on their social media feed, email them, however you get it to them, let them listen to it, because obviously the more people who know, we do really appreciate every tweet or X as it's called now, or every share that brings new listeners in. And really thank you for allowing us to be part of your journey, be you a qualified colleague or a training colleague. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.